Just a couple disclaimers. I've been in the ethnos bubble for let's see now, 12 years or so. The missions thing for a while, and a lot of how I kind of got introduced to missions or introduced to unreached people and the idea of overseas cross-cultural ministry was a lot of like guilt stuff, like, hey, there's all these people who have no access to the gospel, like, what are you going to do with that? And so I don't want to do that this morning. Like, I don't want to make all you guys feel guilty for, using your lives, just living in America, and like, wow, you just wasted your lives. Like, I don't want to come across that way. So I because, when it's kind of like one of those things, when I was 18, 19, you get presented with, like, there's all these billions of people who have never heard about Christ, like, and so for me, you start to play mind games a little bit, which I had, and the Lord has done a lot of work in me to kind of unpack and unravel that. But it could very easily turn into, like, how could I go and spend the rest of my life, like, selling life insurance to somebody when, like, that's the reality of what's going on around the world. So, like, I don't want to make anybody feel bad or anything like that, but just there is going to be a lot of statistics and sharing with you guys, like, what is the realities around the world, just to help you guys understand kind of where things are at. So, yeah, just a disclaimer I want to give for that, so that you guys know where my heart and where I'm coming from, as I share some of those things. And then just a reminder from last week when we talked about God's desire to dwell with his people, be with his people, be in the midst of his people. I didn't, last week I didn't connect it super well, but I was even reflecting on it this week a little bit more, that you see in the Old Testament God's desire to be in the midst of Israel so that the nations would know that there is a God in Israel, and we have a God who is in us and lives through us, that other people may see our good deeds and glorify God in heaven. Like, there is that idea where God dwelling with his people is supposed to have an effect on the people around us as well. And so just a reminder of that. And then I wanted to read this verse from Revelation 5:9, where there's the multitude around the throne, and they sang a new song saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation." So as we talk about these things and talk about the people around the globe and the people that are actually in our country too, that God's trajectory, his story, is going towards a place where we are living and dwelling with God forever, and there's people from every tribe, tongue, language, and nation with us there too. And so that word for people, that word for nation, is where ethnos got their name from. But, ethnos, the ethne, the people, tribal, indigenous people all around the world. And it's the same word that's in Matthew 28 in the Great Commission there, go and make disciples of all nations. Excuse me. It's not just go and make, a church in India. It's every language group, which I'm going to show a video here, hopefully that will, better than I can and in shorter time than I can, help you guys understand exactly what those things mean. So I'm going to go and try and be tech savvy here. I tried to put a video in my keynote, but I couldn't get it to play up here. So let's see if Eric taught me everything I need to know about this. So we're going to go down here. It's on YouTube.
That's a good trick.
I've always said if I had $1 for every tech issue there ever was, I'd be a rich person. We just did this. There we go.
Hey, there it
There we
goes.
go. Hopefully it still has my search up. It does. Let's go.
Sunburn look bad.
Perfect. Let's see what ad they have for us this morning. What do they want us to buy?
Life can be hard.
Water softener.
We're going to skip it, though. As much as we'd like to buy
What is a UPG? UPG stands for Unreached People Group. But to understand what that means, we need to first talk about people groups. When Jesus told his followers, "Go and make disciples of all nations," the Greek words he used were ta ethne, meaning all ethnic groups or people groups. So what is a people group? A people group is basically a group of individuals that have a common sense of history, language, beliefs, and identity. It is pretty much a group of people that considers us, and everyone else, them. While there are about 196 countries in the world today, there are over 16,000 distinct people groups.
Wow.
Let's look at Pakistan as an example. That is one nation going by our English word, but ethnically Pakistan has over 400 distinct nations or people groups within its borders. Around 7,000 of those 16,000 total people groups are considered UPGs, or unreached people groups. A group is considered unreached if less than 2% of their population is evangelical Christian. That is, it has too few true believers to evangelize and disciple the rest of the people group. Almost 3 billion people fall into this category. Over 3,000 of those 7,000 unreached people groups are considered UPGs, or unengaged unreached people groups. These people groups have no churches, no believers, no missionaries, and no one actively focused on engaging them. 95% of all unreached people groups are located in the part of the world between 10 degrees latitude and 40 degrees latitude, stretching from North Africa to Southeast Asia. We call this the 1040 window. It's in the 1040 window that most of the major non-Christian religions hold sway. Collectively, they are known as the Thumb people: tribal, Hindu, unreligious, including many Chinese, Muslim, and Buddhist. Jesus said that the gospel of the kingdom would be preached as a testimony to ta ethne, all people groups, and then the end would come. Less than 3% of our total cross-cultural missionary force is working with unreached people groups. We must go to the unreached. At the same time, it's estimated that over 350 unreached people groups are living in the United States today as immigrants, refugees, and international students. We must welcome the unreached. Christ commands us to make disciples of all nations. Jesus is alive. His mission for us is clear, yet the task stands incomplete. Together, we can change that.
All right, now let's see if I can just get back now to where I need to be. Yeah, I've always just found that video to be really helpful. There I have it, but it's not going to play. To just help understand, like, just defining some terms and stuff, ways, and I'm going to review them here just for sake of repetition. But to just take India as an example, near and dear to Josh's heart. But you could, say like, okay, we're going to reach every nation. We're going to reach the nation of India. But in the Greek, what that word actually means is that all these red dots all represent different people groups that are inside the country of India. Like, we have countries and nations that are geographical boundaries in terms of what a country actually is, but these nations, all people who they probably, what language did you guys speak in India?
Telugu.
Okay, but that's only one of many languages, and that's going to be a main well-spoken language, and underneath that are going to be a bunch of other languages that people actually grew up speaking more in the household. So you've got, in India, just as an example, number of people groups in India, and this is according to the Joshua Project, which you can Google search, and they have so much information on the Joshua Project. But in the country of India alone, there's 2,272 people groups, over 2,000 of which are unreached people groups. You've got a total population in India of 1.4 plus billion people. Population of that unreached is over 95%. There's Hindu, there's Buddhist, there's Muslim in this country. Only about 2.2% of the entire country is Christian. And so when you start talking about like unreached people and stuff, like it's not just these people speak Spanish. Like, no, there's a lot of languages and people around the world that don't have a Bible. There's probably a Bible in Telugu, but there's not a Bible in any of these other languages here, which is what they actually speak and know it's their heart language. So people group, people with a common history, a common language, a common culture, and broken up in a million different ways. I wish there was a way to define that in America. We don't really have that in America. We're very, a big conglomerate of things. The best I could equivalent it to, which isn't even close, is me growing up in the Northeast. I have a very specific culture I kind of grew up in. There's words that I say that are funny. There's specific phrases that I say that are funny. But you could say Australia, England, and America. We all speak English, but there's differences in what we understand. There's certain things that you can say in America that you can't say in England because those mean different things. Like, that's the closest I could get to help our English-speaking minds understand what that is, because to us, the whole world speaks English. But just because people speak English doesn't mean that the truth of what God's Word actually means something to them in English. They need it in their own language. So that's a people group. Unreached people groups, like they said, less than 2% evangelical, no indigenous church among them. So this is a picture, again, from Joshua Project, just as an example. The Somali people from Somalia, but they live all over Africa. In total, there's 14.2 million Somali people in Africa and across the world. They are 98.89, so basically 99% Muslim. They are 0.94% evangelical. They have a lot of Muslim beliefs mixed with traditional animistic beliefs about the world around them. They face illiteracy, drought, famine, war, malnutrition. I mean, we know from the news the history of what's going on in Somalia and the war and the people suffering from that. And so you've got Somali people who have no access to the gospel. They have no Bible in their language, and there they are, living every day. Day goes by. Unengaged people groups, which I think somewhat they're calling frontier people groups now, but fewer than 0.1% believers. So I know the video says there's all kinds of definitions are out there, but the ballpark is fewer than 0.1% believers. Like, there's basically nobody. And there's no church planning strategy to actually engage them, so there's not people boots on the ground actually thinking about reaching out to these people groups. And so this picture here is of a northern Pashtun person from Afghanistan, but they're Afghanistan, Pakistan, they're America. This people group is one of the largest Muslim tribal groups in the world, over 38 million of them throughout the world. At least 30 major tribes. They're 99.98% Islamic, so even more unreached than Somali people. And they have, it's actually interesting, I was reading about them, they have a history of being engaged with Christianity. They had some sort of contact with William Carey over the years where he was doing some translation work in Pashtun. But over time and the war and the Taliban that has gone on, the history of the USSR over there, that just kind of fizzled out. And now there's no active strategy to actually engage these people and reach these people. So just as an example, I mean, there's a bunch more, but just as an example there. And I've used this map before, but this is the map of unreached people groups across the world, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You'll notice there are actually even some in the United States as well. But yeah, it's it's pretty. When I first saw it, I mean, again, I was 18, so it was like, well, how could I go do something else in my life, which was I had to work through. But at the same time, it's like, man, this is tough. It's tough that there's a lot of people, and a lot of the people living in this 1040 window here that they're talking about. I mean, in countries that have been wrecked by political upheaval, civil war, malnutrition, poverty, just you name it, more than just their own religion antagonizing them, a lot of other factors and variables that are really keeping these people in darkness, and it's really sad. Okay, I wanted to back up here. Because I wanted to talk about, just as we talk about unreached people, we talk about reaching the world too, just understand the reality of what is the goal? What is the realistic goal mission organizations like my own that I work with, Ethnos 360, there's Frontier, there's Pioneers, there's all kinds of different groups, team, that work all across the globe, Africa Inland Mission, like you name it, there's a million different organizations that are working overseas. What is the goal? So I wanted to break it down into 3 different parts, but because Ethnos' tagline, at least, is a mature church for every people. Like, the goal is maturity. If we look at Scripture, it doesn't seem, at least, that Jesus, the Apostle Paul, Peter, James, John, that their interest is just go and tell people. Like, just go and tell them. Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations. Paul seems very concerned for the churches that he plants, for them to be growing spiritually in their walk with the Lord, that it's not just go and tell people they believe and then they go to heaven when they die. Amazing. Like, yes, that's incredible. We want those people to hear the good news about what Jesus has done for them. But the goal is maturity. We want to see a church established. We want to see disciples made. So it takes evangelism. It takes getting out there and telling people about Jesus. It takes a lot of discipleship, of helping people understand who they are in Christ, what Jesus has done, what he is doing, and what he's going to do one day. And then translation is a big thing. I mean, the Somali people I was looking at, like, basically, I think they said 80% of their adult population is illiterate. So, yes, they can learn, but if they have a Bible in their language, what use is it if they can't read it? Like, they can't, like the limit of how much we can learn. I mean, there's even studies about this, about how literacy connects to knowledge, like helping people grow and mature in their faith through being able to translate the Bible in their language, where these people can hear about Jesus, they can trust Jesus, they can read their own Bible with their own eyes, their own ears, their own words, and read it and grow. So what does that require to do something like that? It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time. There are different philosophies and methodologies about reaching unreached people. Through our training, you can pop over there, grab a translator, and tell John 3:16, and bada bing, bada boom, and whatnot. But, and I'm not saying that may not work, but at the same time, like, if the goal is maturity, introducing people to Jesus, discipling them, providing the translation of the Word of God in their language where they can read and grow and understand, where that church doesn't need missionaries anymore, they can sustain themselves on their own, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to do so, which we'll get into next week. I've got a couple different families I reached out to about around the world, like, what does it look like to actually do this, to try and encapsulate, like, the time and energy it takes to actually go and reach a people group who has never had any access to the gospel. So there you go. I want to talk about two contexts around the world, both two contexts, one around the world and one in our midst. So I'll talk about around the world first. Like the video said, according to the Joshua Project and the research team, there are about 7,000 plus unreached people groups around the world, which is, hi Evan, little turd. Unreached people groups about 7,000 plus around the world, and that equates to about 3.4 billion people around the world that are part of an unreached people group, that are less than 2% evangelical and have no indigenous church plant among them, so they don't have enough people in their group to actually evangelize themselves. So about 3.4 billion people fit into that. And then unengaged groups, there's about 4,800 or so unengaged people groups that have no believers, no church planting strategy attempting to engage them. And that equates to just over 2 billion people around the world. So this is the 1040 window, like I said. The percentage of people inside of the 1040 window, about 5,900 people groups in the world, which equates to about 3.3 billion people. So there are unreached people groups outside of that 1040 window, but most of the unreached people groups are there. And probably there's a lot of reasons for that, but probably a big key one is that those are the countries that you can't just go into as a Christian and a missionary and say, I want to tell people about Jesus. Like, you can't do that. And so these people and those people groups, it really is difficult it takes a lot of time and energy and resources to reach a people group there because you can't just go as a missionary. You got to have a degree, you got to have a job, you got to have a career, you got to have a visa that allows you to be there. You may not be able to proselytize, so you going and telling people about Jesus has to look pretty different in order to be and live and stay in that country. So it's not just, like an ethnos church plant, you go to PNG, you live there for 20 years, you learn the language, you translate the Bible, you give the teaching, you get elders. Like, it's not a straight linear line in places like that, so it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. I found this interesting. I looked, because I think, me, as I got mobilized into missions, got very 1040 centric. Like, that's what all Irish people groups are. Like, I spoke, I still speak a fair amount of Spanish. I spoke a lot more, coming out of high school and living in Mexico for a bit. But I was like, I don't want to go to Mexico. I got to speak Spanish. Like, all the people, Irish people groups are over there. Like, I want to go there. But realizing, even I'm big into history, like the cyclical nature of history, like, it is interesting, like, what's going on in Europe now compared to maybe where Europe was Reformation times. Like, very interesting. So I looked up some statistics about Europe, because they're outside the 1040 window, but what does Europe look like? So this is a Pew Research study that I looked at from 2018. So this is 6 years ago and pre-pandemic. So I can't imagine what it is post-pandemic now. But this was pre-pandemic. The religious identity in Europe. Now, 71% of Western Europe would identify as Christian. Now, I think, according to the Joshua Project and many other people, I mean, they could lump Catholicism, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, all of that kind of in Christianity, which I'll get to a little bit of that in a bit, because I did an interview with a guy from Belgium. It was very interesting, his background in religion and what that looked like. It says Christianity, but some of these statistics don't actually bear out like that they are walking with the Lord, at least. So 71% would identify as Christian. 22% of people attend services at least once a month. So you've got 71% who would say that they're Christian, but only 22% attend church once a month. Now, again, church attendance is not the only marker of spirituality, but it is a little bit of an indicator of, like, okay, how seriously do people in Western Europe take their faith? Okay? I thought it was interesting. These columns here, so the west, or the left column, the west, what am I talking about? The left column is those who would identify as Christian and being attending church. The middle here would be those that identify as Christian but don't attend church. The right side here would be non-religious, and then the 5% here is other religions. So if you'll notice here in the Netherlands, 48% of the Netherlands is non-religious. So almost half the country's population is agnostic, atheistic, something of that sort. Norway, 43% of the country is agnostic, atheistic, something of the sort. So I thought that was very interesting. I'm thinking of, Ulrich Zwingli in the Reformation, like in Switzerland, like, and Martin Luther, like a lot of Reformation birthed out of Western Europe, and now this is where Western Europe is at right now. So that's just, Netherlands and Norway. There's others, but that one popped up as particularly interesting. Another thing that was interesting on the median here, like the middle ground, the average, 18% of those in Western Europe are actually church-attending Christians. Like they go to church on a regular basis. They are involved in their church. Now that could still include Catholicism, which I'm not saying every Catholic is not saved. Just as a ballpark figure, I just thought that was interesting that Western Europe 500 years ago, the birthplace of the Reformation, and now Western Europe, 18% of the population are those that are actually seemingly taking their faith seriously. I thought that was interesting. So I did this interview with this guy. He was an international student at our college. His name was Milan, and he was from Belgium. So I was in a class on cultural anthropology where I had to do this ethnographic interview, this fancy words. I just basically had to interview him about his country, what it's like, where he's from, religion, culture, so-and-so. Learned a lot of interesting things, like Belgians would think it's nuts for Americans to drive from like Wisconsin to Florida. They think it's absolutely crazy because everything in Belgium is like 2 hours away. So they're like, you drive 2 hours and it's like you drove a long way. So Americans, they're crazy. But anyway, I talked to him about his religion, like just growing up. How did he grow up? Because if you look at the demographics of Belgium, there are a decent chunk you can see 38% agnostic, but Catholicism, many people would still claim that they're Christians, Catholic, whatever. So he said that he grew up agnostic, and both his parents were both atheistic agnostic. And then his grandma, I think on his mom's side, grew up as an atheist as well. And then I think on his dad's side, they might have been Catholic. But 3 generations up, there's still this non-religious bent to Western Europe that, like, this is not a new phenomenon. It's actually kind of been going on for a while, where the rise of the non-religious is pretty high in Western Europe. So, that thinking of that, like, history thing a little bit, it's seemingly, throughout history, it seems like things that happen in Europe tend to have a little trickle effect to America, a little ways later. Europe kind of picks up on things, and America's kind of next or whatever. But we see that happening in America today. We see the rise of non-religious in America is going up and up as time goes on. And then you see in places like China, like, man, the gospel is doing some pretty profound things in places like that. It just kind of, cycling back. It's very interesting. But just to give you guys the point that what's going on around the globe is there's an unreached people, there's a unengaged people, there's a non-religious people, there's a lack of gospel clarity and gospel understanding and gospel access across the globe. Yes, the 1040 window has a lot of work and a lot of people there, but Europe, South America, Africa, all over the place, there is a lack of access to the gospel, and at the very least, a lack of access to gospel clarity. And so there's a lot of things we can pray about, and a lot of different ways, a lot of different potential for the church to be involved in what's going on around the world. So that's kind of around the globe, and I think I'll have time at the end for questions, just if you guys have any thoughts. But that's what's kind of going on around the globe, but here's what's going on in our midst. And I just a quick disclaimer too, like, I know it's election season, and I know it's politics, and I know everyone's like, maybe not you guys, but seemingly talk radio is always like, the refugees and immigrants are ruining our country. And I get it, for political sense, I get it, but you're going to see, like, there are people right in our midst that in terms of, like, the trajectory of where God's taking our story, there's an incredible opportunity too. And so hopefully we can balance the tension there as much as possible. But in Milwaukee County, this is just Milwaukee County. This is not Wisconsin as a whole, or Madison County, because I'm sure Madison County has pretty similar statistics. But in Milwaukee County, just from the research I did, the Jewish population in Milwaukee County is over 25,000 people. The population of Muslims in just Milwaukee is 10,000, 15,000 people, and Hindus is just over 6,000, which there's that Hindu temple in Pewaukee right across from Costco. So like it's not like it's hiding anywhere. Like in Milwaukee County, Waukesha County, Dane County, that's where Madison's at, right? Dane County. There are people with different religious beliefs all right around us, and it's not so much anymore like, oh, I believe in God, but I don't really go to church anymore. Like, no, it's Muslim, it's Buddhist, it's Hindus, it's Jewish, all right around us. And good old America, we have a ton of different organizations that are probably working to think about how can we reach these people right in our midst. But that's just Milwaukee County. I'm sure statewide and Madison, there's much more. But that's just what I found in Milwaukee, and I thought it was pretty interesting. People groups. We talked about unreached people groups and specific ethnic people groups in our midst. The top one's the most interesting one I found. The Rohingya people of Myanmar. And we know what's going on. If you don't know what's going on over there, like human rights crisis, I mean, these people are being murdered and killed and fleeing the country for their lives. And so, weirdly enough, the largest population of this people group is right in our very own Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There are 4,000 people, Rohingya people, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And that's an unreached people group. They have no access to the gospel, they have no Bible in their language, and they're living right there in Milwaukee. And so, I mean, what a crazy opportunity. We're like looking around this room, like, are we going to be the ones? Like, I got chronic illness. I can't go anywhere. But could I go to Milwaukee? Maybe. Like, could I support organizations that are working with unreached people in Milwaukee? Probably. But yeah, it's crazy. 4,000 people right in Milwaukee of these people that are fleeing for their lives because the people in their home country want to kill them. The military in their home country want to kill them. So they're here in Milwaukee. Yeah, there you go. Next people, the Hmong people from Southeast Asia. There are over 22,000 Hmong people in Milwaukee. Is it Wausau? Is that how you say it?
Yep.
Did I get that right? You got. And is it Eau Claire? Is that how you say that
Yeah.
name? Like, my goodness, it just plays with the mind how you say these names. But in Milwaukee, Wausau, and Sheboygan, 22,000 Hmong people, and they're one of the largest people from Southeast Asia in America. I mean, they're people that have immigrated everywhere into the country, a lot in California, but here in those three places, at least according to my research that I found, the Pew Research Center, 22,000 Hmong people. And again, I'm not saying all these people, like the Hmong people, aren't entirely unreached, but they are an ethnic people group that's right here in our neighborhood that more than likely do not have access to the gospel, and so there they are. The Somali Bantu, there are 400 Somali Bantu people in Milwaukee as well, and they're fleeing, they're refugees, human rights crisis in Somalia, and so I think there's even more in Madison and in Eau Claire. Like they're doing some resettlements here in Wisconsin, which I know not everyone's the biggest fan of. I understand that, but in Milwaukee, at least, there's 400 Somali people that are Muslim and have no access to the gospel either. There are some Syrian refugees. I don't have a number on the Syrian refugees, but I read a pretty cool article about, if you guys know, if you're familiar with Eastbrook Church in Milwaukee, but they have some connections with some refugee centers and whatnot. And so these two brothers came over from Syria, and I think they started some coffee company or something, and they're both believers. But they said they would not be able to be where they are without their connection with Eastbrook Church. I was like, that's a pretty interesting story of like a church connecting with two refugee brothers coming from war-torn Syria, like to actually help them get to a better place. Now, I don't know their story. They might have not been believers when they came here, but because of their connection with Eastbrook Church, got involved in Bible study or discipleship or something and came to know Jesus, and now they're doing really, really well. So I know there's Syrian refugees that are in Milwaukee as well. Afghan refugees, I think we all know the news back in 2021, was it, when the U.S. troops left Afghanistan, and they settled 13,000 Afghan refugees in Fort McCoy, which is just west of the Dells, I believe. Yeah. And then after a time, they kind of started resettling them. And there's about 1,000, it looks like, were settled in Appleton and Madison. So there's an Afghanistan refugee community in Madison that those people are going to be very Islamic and don't have access to the gospel, don't have people coming and learning their language, learning their culture, and telling them about Jesus, and they're right in Madison. And then lastly, there's refugees that have been settled, which I know, I know it's a thing. I know that was just in the news too with Eau Claire. There's some refugees from the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, up there, and then refugees coming from Venezuela, because Venezuela is just a mess right now. And so that's just Wisconsin, not to mention California, Texas, New York, New Jersey, Florida, all these places that have refugees, immigrants coming from, I just wanted to help you guys understand that, like, the unreached people group thing isn't just a global thing. It's not just a out there thing. It's not just a weird, ambiguous idea. Like, no, it's right in our neighborhood. It's right in our backyard that we have opportunities. We have people groups that are right there. So if you're, I can't or I don't feel like the Lord is leading me to go live over in the middle of nowhere, you don't have to. Milwaukee and Madison are two hot spots where refugees and immigrants are settling in different communities, and those people have no access to the gospel there.
What were your numbers of the DRC people?
I didn't get a number on that. I think it's just becoming. I think it's slowly growing. It looks like. I know Milwaukee has some. Which I'll talk about next week as a which next week, I'll have some people to talk about, and then some ideas of how you guys can get involved. But there's an international community center in Milwaukee that does like tutoring for refugees, and there are like Somali refugees, Syrian refugees, and some refugees from Congo. Now these refugees, a couple of them have come to the school and played soccer, and they're like, you haven't seen them before, right, babe? I've been down there playing with them once, but they gotta be in their 20s, maybe. So it's not. I know it's not an overwhelming amount. Like the Afghan and the Rohingya seem like the two biggest immigrant populations we seem to have, besides obviously those from Mexico, the Hispanic immigrants that illegally and legally that are here. But in terms of like an unreached ethnic group, I think the DRC and Venezuela are pretty low right now. But I can't get too far into this. But who knows? Election season comes. Like, who knows how much that's going to change? It could go up. It could go down. I don't think Venezuela's getting any better. I don't think DRC is getting any better. So it's interesting to try and balance like our gratefulness for we have such an amazing country we live in, even with everything wrong with it, that we don't have we're not killing each other. Like a lot of us we have a roof over our heads. We're full. We have everything we need, and these people in their countries have nothing. And so I don't think it's going to get much better. So I don't have an exact number on that for you, though.
Voice of the Martyrs have been really focused. I get that, and they've been really focused on the DRC.
Yeah.
Recently, lots of persecution there.
And I don't think, it's hard. Like, I think for good reason they probably don't publish their exact numbers. I don't know what the point of giving people asylum and then saying, hey, well, these people are granted asylum from this specific place, so
Right.
government, come and get them. I think the numbers seem pretty sparse, at least from what I can tell. I think there was just 70 refugees allocated to Eau Claire sometime in the last year from the DRC and Venezuela. I think it's the only number I saw. Some tremendous opportunities there. Just to give you guys an idea, it's not just a theoretical thing over there. Like, it is a really present reality in our neighborhoods too. Moving on from there, if those are the realities around the world, where are our missionaries located? Like the American church, like where do our missionaries go? And so we have 97% of our missionaries go to places outside the 1040 window, and 3%, or less than 3%, go to places inside of the 1040 window. Again, I'm not saying that it should be the exact opposite, but the imbalance is pretty significant, and a lot of the reasons are if you want to go to Syria, it's not as cut and dry as going to Colombia. Colombia is still difficult. It's not like which one's more difficult to work in. If you're going to engage people with the gospel living overseas, it's going to be difficult. But it's the line from getting from point A to point B is a lot more straighter going to places that are outside the 1040 window. 3% of our missionaries are located actually inside the 1040 window, and it's okay, so if Jesus says go and make disciples of all nations, maybe it could look a little different. Maybe it could be 80-20 or 70-30 or something in there where we as churches we can help equip our people to balance that out a little bit. That's where our missionaries are located. There are 5.5 million Christian workers. I think that's Christian in ministry Christian workers, and 7.6% of those actually work in another country. So vast majority of our Christian workers work inside of America. Only a small percentage of those Christian workers actually work outside of America. Which again, I'm not proposing we switch that percentage. Just letting you guys know that there is that. That's just where things are at. Okay, so that's where our missionaries are located. Where does our money go? So 82% of, now again, I'm not saying this specific church, just in general, this is from a Gospel Coalition article from 2023, so the statistics are fairly relevant. 82% of our church budgets go to our local church. 12% go to domestic evangelism, so like local outreach, things like that. 5.9% go to overseas work, and then 0.1% goes to people working with unreached people. Again, I'm not proposing again that we switch all of those things, but it does, again, like it just can get out of whack. It can get out of whack a little bit of like, how do we, be churches in America that are focused on telling people about Jesus, about go and make disciples of all nations, but 0.1% of our finances. Like it's kind of like one thing you say it, and then where Jesus says where your treasure is, there your heart is too. Like our treasure is very obviously not like in that yet, and it's not saying here, just in general. The American church in unreached people, which I'm not bashing the American church either. Like there's amazing things that the American church has done, is going to do. God's obviously working, but just giving you guys some statistics to just show it. Like there's still probably some blind spots, just like there are in our own personal lives, So this is funny. This is from a different article from a article by people called Project 42. I was wondering, where do we spend the majority of our time? And rather than finding where we spend the majority of our time, I found some things about what we spend money on as Americans, and like going back to what Jesus said about our treasure, like where we spend our money kind of reflects where we spend our time. So I thought this was interesting. So we spend more on Christmas gifts each year than we give to Christian causes. So we spend over $1 trillion on Christmas gifts every year, which is I just thought, that's interesting. We spend more on weight loss programs in America than we give to missions. We spend $72 billion on weight loss programs every year. Interesting. And then the last was, as Americans in general, we spend more on Halloween costumes for our pets than we do give to the unreached. And we spend, an average, like America as a total, spends $490 million on Halloween costumes for their pets.
Wow.
Now, this is not the church. I don't think this is reflective of the American church. It's America in general. That, like, we tend to give money, like, if we were to all look at our own personal finances, mine included, like, the average amount of our finances that goes towards stuff that, like, that we need to, or that keeps us comfortable, keeps us happy, versus how much do we give. Like it's usually a pretty sizable amount that goes towards things that facilitate our livelihood, and not necessarily something that facilitates somebody else's. So it's not so much, again, we flip those things at all, but it's just a consideration of, okay, like that's the reality. Like what do we do with that? If the reality is we spend all our money on these certain things, then maybe it's reflective of we spend a lot of our time just thinking about ourselves, which I think Americans are really good at. I'm really good at. Human beings are really good at just thinking about us. And yet, if the commission is to not think about us, but to go and make disciples of all nations, then clearly there's probably some things that ought to be rejiggered a little bit, if that makes sense. So, again, what is God asking us to do? I'm not laying guilt on you guys or passing blame or saying the American church is doing an awful job or anything like that. I just want to educate. This is where, our minds have been for the last 10, 12 years as we've been involved in missions and training people. Is the reality is, like, there are unreached people groups out there, and it's not as if, like, the 20 of us are going to go reach 3.2 billion people. Like, that's not going to happen. But, like, okay, if last week talking about God's desire to dwell with his people, like that's the trajectory of this story, where one day the reality of what like present reality looks like is us dwelling with God forever with people from every tribe, people group, nation around the world for eternity. Then how can you guys, as much as is realistic, within reason, how much can we align ourselves, our perspectives, our lifestyle with that reality? Like, if that's where God's going, just like I said in last week, like, how can we find our stories in his story and become part of what he's doing? And that means our perspectives, our lifestyles, like, how can we be a part of that? We're not going to go solve every problem. We're not going to go solve every issue. But what are some things, if you think about this week, like well, okay, what's like one thing I can do? And thinking about that. So next week, I'll discuss some specific ways that you can be involved, both globally and in our community, because there are some pretty cool opportunities. And I'll talk about some people that I know that are living in different countries. I think I've got one from Nepal, one from Colombia, one from Papua New Guinea, and then maybe one from Africa. But just to help you guys understand, what these people are actually doing and what it takes to reach people.